Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and this is the Final Audio B3. If you've been watching this channel this week, you probably noticed earlier this week I started with kind of a showdown between three different budget IEMs, around $25. And in that showdown, Final Audio came out on top with the E500. So the B3, this is not a budget IEM, right? This is kind of me taking a look and seeing what happens with Final Audio when you take that budget from $25 all the way up to $500, because that's what the B3 costs. So now for 500 bucks, what you get is a sound signature that's actually not that different from the E500, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But this is, instead of a single dynamic driver earphone, it's actually two balanced armatures, which is interesting. So they're getting a kind of a similar sound signature out of a completely different driver configuration. But of course, that's not going to be the only difference. You'll see the aesthetics of this, the build quality, the fit and stuff. That's all very different as well. But yeah, so I've actually had this earphone honestly for a couple of months now, and I've been living with it and comparing it to some other IEMs in roughly this price range, some other all balanced armature sets, and just kind of figuring out, where does this thing land in that realm? Is it also still top dog at 500 bucks? So that's what we're going to talk about today. And like all my other reviews, this is a live stream. So if you're watching now, and you have a question about the B3 or any of the other IEMs that we talk about today, please leave it in the live chat. At the end of the review, I'll give this thing a score. We'll say our goodbyes, but then for the people that are here live, we can hang around and have a little chat. Otherwise, I guess there's not much left to say about this before we head to the table, so we might as well jump over to that now. And there you go. Take a look at the, I think, pretty beautiful Final Audio E500. Not E500, sorry. The B3. And let's give it the roadie wrap test while I talk about what comes inside the box, which you see here. And honestly, the packaging for $500 is pretty bare bones. I'm not mad at it or anything like that, but if you were expecting a big elaborate unboxing experience and excessive accessories for 500 bucks, Final doesn't give you that. You get basically the same accessories that you get with the $25 E500, including a full set of Final ear tips. In fact, I'm missing one of them because I used it earlier, put it away somewhere else. It doesn't matter. You get 5 sets of ear tips, 5 different sizes, which is one of the reasons I like these ear tips quite a bit. They also include these little ear hooks, these little ear guides that you could wrap around the cable to kind of give some semblance of a preformed ear hook, because these cables are not preformed. But I don't know, Final includes these with their other IEMs, and I've never found them useful. But if you ever wanted a clear pair, there you go. They do also include, I think, this pretty handy little case. It's made out of silicone, so it's not especially hard. But it's, it's kind of like the right size. It's very pocketable, very thin. You can see that. And then back here, it just kind of opens up like that. And this section is really stretchable. So when you have the IEMs in it, you kind of see it bulge out. But otherwise, you get a very nice compact package. My only complaint with this case is that it actually seems to be made of the same silicone that the ear tips are made out of, which is a really nice grippy silicone. The only downside, and it's true of the ear tips and true of this case as well, is that it picks up lint quite a bit. I don't know if that's going to show up here on camera, but I promise you, you throw this thing in a pocket, it's going to come out linty. So that's the accessories. Let's go ahead and take a look at the IEM itself. And I'm just going to say right up front, like, this is honestly one of my favorite looking IEMs. I think aesthetically, this thing is stunning. And the build quality is actually, it's quite nice too. It backs it up. So the shell pieces are made out of, I don't know, some sort of metal, stainless steel or something. They have a bit of a matte finish to them, so they're not entirely glossy. They can show fingerprints, I guess, in some cases, but for the most part, because they're a little bit matte, they do resist being overly smudgy and nasty like some other glossy metallic IEMs can be. And then the general shape of them, well, I'll talk about how it fits in a little bit, but I think the aesthetic of this thing is just really, really nice. It's got these chiseled lines on it that gives it a pretty stunning look. And if you're curious to see this thing in a little bit higher fidelity, I've actually got some pictures of this on my Instagram page, which I do have linked to in the description down below. But yeah, apart from that, let's take a look at the cable that these things come on, which I think is In some ways, it's kind of a pain in the butt cable, right? It's a little bit on the stiff side. You can kind of see that it's not quite lying flat. I don't know. It's okay. I think this is a cable that kind of, it looks better than it behaves, but it doesn't actually behave that bad. It's just a little bit on the stiff side. And it's interesting. So I talked about these things not having preformed ear hooks. That is true, but you'll probably notice that these things are still kind of like shaped to my ears. And that's just because I think over time, these things kind of wear into the shape of a preformed ear hook. These guides right here, as much as I never use them, I have even doubly, triply, quadruply less reason to use them. But yeah, that's the cable. You know, it's a little bit thin, a little bit stiff, but it is, I think, really handsome. And it's got this, let's see if we can zoom in on this and take a look at this braid. It's got this really tight braid. It's not quite as soft as some other IM cables, but again, I think that aesthetically it's quite nice. And so I'll throw them in my ears so we can talk about how these things fit. And I got some good things to say about the fit and some complaints as well. I mean, generally, I really like the shape, the general shape of them. And let's zoom in so you can see how these things fit in my ear. They just nestle themselves quite snugly inside my ear. And they're decently secure even. So you can see me pulling on the cable. They're not coming loose, which I like. They kind of remind me of something like a Shure earphone, where it just, the way that those IMs fit, I don't know why more manufacturers don't choose this style of fit, because it's pretty excellent, and really no exception here with the B3s. Now, my one complaint, and I mentioned I was going to complain, we'll zoom back in so you can take a look. Those chiseled edges that I talked about being pretty aesthetically handsome, unfortunately, I do find that they rub against my ear, like right in this section. And because of that, I find that these are just not that comfortable in the long term. I got kind of used to it, and like if I'm just like sitting up and not lying my head down on the side of the couch or sleeping with them, they don't really bother me that much, but I'm never not really aware that they are chiseled edges and a little bit sharp, so they're not the most comfortable because of that. Again, they're not bad, but expect if you get a pair of these things and you wear them, especially if you wear them and you like lie on your side or something like that, you're probably gonna feel those chiseled edges on your ear. And in my experience, it's not the most comfortable. So that's the fit, that's the build, the accessories and everything that comes in it. Let's talk about the sound. And the general sound here, I'll start by, like I typically do, just kind of giving you a top level description of the sound signature. And I think I mentioned up front that these actually have a pretty similar sound signature to the E500. In fact, if you're interested in looking at the frequency response, again, I'm not going to go through a frequency response in my reviews, but if you're interested in comparing it, I do have both the B3 and the E500 graphed on squig.link. But yeah, with that, that comparison, you can kind of see how similar they are tuned, which is to say, in case you missed the E500 review, these are kind of a warm neutral. I've described these, the final B3 is a warm, laid-back tune with a bit of a thick lower mid-range. It's got maybe a little bit of a mid-bass boost, but not a lot. I would not describe this as a bassy IM at all, so if you're looking for a bassy sound, I would avoid this. But also, if you're like looking to just avoid an overly bright, forward, kind of aggressive sound signature, I think the B3 delivers on that, a lot like the E500. It's just this warm, laid-back, neutral tune. I think that it gives you like this very full sound, like very full, kind of thick sound, and especially that in comparison to some of the other IMs that we're going to talk about later. But it doesn't really come at the expense of, sounding muddy or anything like that, which is kind of the risk with a warm, laid-back tune like this. When you don't have a lot of upper mid-range lift, there is the risk that the sound will kind of come across a little bit too thick and congested, and I don't think the B3 falls into that. But it still doesn't have that upper mid-range lift that would kind of lend it a sense of clarity. I think that is a common word that people would describe an IM that has more upper mid-range, while this is got that relaxed upper mid-range, so not super strong on clarity, but again, on definition, it's actually not bad. If we're using terms like musical and analytical, I would say that the final B3 clearly falls into the category of musical and not analytical. And overall, and we'll get into this a little bit more detail in a bit, I think that a way to describe this is, like, honestly, I don't think this is the most technical sounding IM. And frankly, it's not my ideal frequency response, but it's got a charm. And honestly, I do quite like it. So what I do like about the final B3, generally I think it's a pleasant tone, even though it's not necessarily my exact favorite tonality. It's definitely warmer and more laid back than my absolute preference. Not every IM has to have my exact preference. There's other things that I'm more concerned about. And this, I think, is a pretty good execution of that warm, laid back tone. I find it generally pretty pleasant, easy to listen to, relaxing, etc. Maybe not the most engaging and like in-your-face aggressive detail retrieval and stuff like that, but that's not what the B3 is about. I think that the mid-range presentation on this is actually pretty nice though, and you'll probably notice a commonality between most of the IMs I like is that they'll have a really strong mid-range presence, and this definitely hits that, right? So it's not heavy on bass. It's not heavy on treble, ergo it's basically a mid-range focused tune, and that's generally what I like. And in a lot of ways, I do think this is kind of a unique sound. I don't have a lot of IMs apart from the E500. I don't know if I have any other IMs that really sound quite like this. So it's neutral, it's warm, it's unique, but it doesn't sound like awkward in tonality or anything like that. I also did want to talk about the bass on this. So despite the fact that it's, obviously not a very bassy IM, and it is an all balanced armature set. In fact, only 2 balanced armatures, so not even like rocking a ton of drivers or anything like that. The bass on this is actually pretty good. Given that, right? It's not going to be as good a bass as you'll get on, let's say a Moondrop Blessing 2. That's got a dynamic driver in there, and that quality of the bass definitely shines through, I think, above something like the B3. But for what this is, I think this is actually pretty good, and it doesn't quite give it that weightless, fluffy sound that a balanced armature bass can tend to have. And then the treble tuning on here, I would say, is pretty decent tuning. It's not totally dark, but I didn't really have any issues with sibilance. Like, it's not a strident sounding earphone, if that's a thing that you're worried about. So I think the treble tuning on this is generally pretty good. And one thing, I think I forgot to note this down in my notes, but another thing that I think is worth calling out that I like about the sound here is that even though it is an all balanced armature set, it somehow sounds more integrated, almost like a single dynamic driver. It doesn't have quite that sharpness in it, and maybe that's a thing that I don't quite like, is it doesn't quite have that sharpness and that detailed definition that balanced armatures tend to have. Here it seems a little bit more smoothed over in the detail, but from that you get, I guess, a little bit better integration, so I think that's a little bit of a trade-off. And just that trade-off kind of continues into what we'll just broadly call the technical aspects. I think that the final B3 is just not the most technical IM. Again, the detail retrieval, not super high. The layering and separation between sounds, I think it's pretty well done. Like, the B3 has a nice depth to it. I think a lot in part due to that really nice bass. But it's not really super precise with the separation of sounds and the 3D imaging that you might get on some other IMs. And I think, again, that's kind of the trade-off with that integration that I described. So that's kind of generally how I would describe the sound here on the Final Audio B3. Generally, I like it quite a bit. It's not my favorite tune. It is not the most technical IM, but it's got this nice, just comfortable, relaxed tune to it. Again, it's unique in my music or in my IM library, and so for that reason alone, I like it. It never sounds unnatural or anything like that. It's just a very chill IM. But how does it compare to some others in this price range? And so what I did was I actually listened to the B3 in comparison to a couple of other BA sets. So what we've got here is the BGVP DM8, and shout out to Hi-Fi Go for sending this in for review a few months ago. And then here we have the Dunu SA6, and shout out to Dunu for sending this one in for review, again, maybe like half a year ago. So I've reviewed both of these on the channel. If you're interested in the reviews of them individually, check out the channel. I've got full videos on them, but we'll do kind of an abbreviated comparison between the B3 and these other all balanced armature sets, which come in a similar price range. So the BGVP DM8 is actually around 350 to 380 bucks. This version is 380. So a little bit cheaper than the final, but then the Dunu here is 550 bucks, so a little bit more expensive. Again, pretty similar. Let's start the comparisons though with the SA6, because I think this is the one that most people are probably more familiar with. Again, this is a really good set. I reviewed this, I think like back in November-ish. Quite liked it, but very, very different sound between these two, despite the fact that they're all balanced armatures and roughly the same price. You get very different sounds. So the SA6 I would just describe as generally a lot more technical. It's stronger on detail and definition. I think also stronger on stage and sort of the separation of sounds, like the definitive separation of sounds. Again, the B3 does okay in that regard, and like it still sounds decently wide. It's just not as like, again, because of that clarity thing, it's just not as precise, precisely defined where sort of the ends and the beginnings of instruments are on the B3. The other thing, the big difference too, and it's probably not unrelated, is just the tuning in general is quite a bit different. I would describe the tuning on the SA6 is maybe a more classical, it's a version of neutral. It's got, some sub bass focus to it. So this is probably the one with the bass that hits harder, but it's going to depend on the music, because some music, because of the mid bass focus, might actually be a little bit bassier here. But I think for the most part, the SA6 is gonna satisfy folks looking for bass better. Although maybe not necessarily in the quality of the bass. I feel like the texture of this can sometimes be a bit better than here. It's just the bass here, because it's so sub bass focused, it can come across a little bit thin and bodiless on the SA6, whereas on the B3, because it's mid bass focused, can be a little bit more full in the body, but again, maybe less rumble and texture. So yeah, I would say between these two, just two very different takes on neutral. Again, kind of warm, laid back. This is a fairly forward, but I don't know, just mostly overall neutral. But again, the much more technical set, if that's what you're after. But these are so different in tune that I would honestly have a hard time picking which one is my favorite. But that will lead us into talking about the BGVP DM8. And this one's interesting for a couple of reasons. One, it's cheaper than the other two by quite a bit, like 350 bucks. Still not super cheap, but it is cheaper. But I think also because it's kind of an in-between, right? Where I described the SA6 as just a more typical leaner take on neutral, and this being the warmer take on neutral. This kind of lands somewhere in between. I think it's closer to the SA6 than the B3, but it does still have some low-end body to it that adds a sense of warmth and just kind of a more relaxed sound versus the SA6. I think also similarly, the BGVP is more technical than the B3, the final. And a lot of that comes down to just really outstanding treble performance here on the DM8. Just, yeah, really quite nice treble. It's nice and present, zero issues with it being strident or sibilant or anything like that. Like I was really pretty impressed with the treble here. I think the bass on the DM8 is a little bit textureless. It's just really like mid bass focused and rolls off quite a bit in the sub bass. So between these, I think that the bass here on the B3 hits harder, and we'll get into the rankings in just a second. So maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. But yeah, I would say, that's kind of the general take on these is, if you want kind of a warm, laid back take on neutral, Final Audio B3. If you want your more traditional, leaner, more forward take on neutral, the Dunu SA6 is a good pick. And then if you want to try something in between, the BGVP DM8. So that is the general sound signature. Let's go ahead and dive into this thing I've been doing lately where I rank them in different categories. And this is not science. This is just kind of off the top of my head, but I think it's good to give folks a sense of how these things kind of compare in these different categories. So in terms of bass quality, here's how I've got these things ranked, actually. I think the B3 has the best bass quality. Not necessarily the most bass quantity, although they're all kind of bass deficient in a sense or in different ways. Like this is, just not a lot of bass, but it's a little warm in the mid bass. Not a ton of sub bass. This is more sub bass focused and quite lean in the mid bass, where this is pretty full in the mid bass, but rolls off quite a bit in the sub bass. So none of these are really bassy IMs, and if you're looking for a bassy set, they'll probably all disappoint you in some ways. Although this probably is the bassiest because of that sub bass, but I think just purely in terms of bass quality, I actually like the Final B3 the most. It's a combination of like the right level of bass, but also just actually good texture to it. Which you can't say about all of these. In terms of treble quality, I think I would actually reverse these. The BGVP DM8 and the SA6 are pretty close, but I don't know, there's something about the treble. I think it just extends a little bit better here on the DM8. I think the treble quality on here is probably tops. SA6 is, again, very, very good treble. In fact, if you recall, I think in my review, I called this out as like some of my favorite treble tuning ever. Still is really good tuning. And then the B3 treble is not bad. It's just, it lacks a bit of definition, where both of these are quite good in the definition side. In terms of mid-range resolution, let's talk about resolution. I'm not going to define that very specifically, but just kind of the sense of detail that you get out of the mid-range. I think that both the BGVP and the SA6 are quite good, and I have a hard time picking between them. Maybe there's a slight edge to the SA6, but I'm going to say that these two are both pretty similar. And then again, kind of in this sort of a technical-ish category of resolution, I think that the B3 falls behind a little bit. In terms of, let's get out of just the pure sound comparisons. In terms of fit and comfort, I would say the Dunu SA6 is like the clear winner. This is one of the best fitting IMs I've ever tried. It's what I said when I reviewed it, and it's still true to this day. The DM8 is not bad at all. I would say that this thing is nice and comfortable, fits very securely. All three of these fit pretty securely, but these two fit phenomenally securely. And then the B3, the Final B3, I'll leave for last because security maybe not quite as good as these, where these are kind of like a custom design. This is a more typical universal design. But then the bigger issue is just those sharp edges that can bother my ears from time to time. But that is leaving us for the final category. I didn't mean to say final that way, but the last category, which in some ways is both the least important and the most important in this comparison, and that's aesthetics. So just purely on like desirability, you look at the thing and you want it, because as much as we audiophiles will spend a lot of time talking about sound quality, I think it's worth calling out that aesthetics, build quality, fit, just some intangible quality about the way the thing looks can matter a lot to us. It matters a lot to me for sure. I don't want to speak for you, but for me, it definitely matters. And just purely in terms of aesthetics, the Final B3 is like a clear winner. Like I'm going to put it way up here. And then next, I would say probably the Dunu SA6 and the DM8 are both, I think this is a really handsome looking IM. Don't get me wrong when I compare it to the B3. The B3 is just, let's go ahead and zoom in on that just so you can take a look, and oh my gosh, what a beautiful IM. So that about does it for my review of the Final Audio B3. I don't know, I guess I'll go ahead and give it a score, and out of 5 stars, I'll give the Final Audio B3 a solid 4 stars. This is an IM that I love, partly because it's beautiful, right? It's not the most comfortable. It's got some issues in terms of comfort, and again, the sound tuning is not my favorite tuning and not the most technical, so there's probably a lot of reasons why I shouldn't love this IM, but honestly, it's a very pleasant sound, and it's a unique sound in my collection, and it looks this beautiful, and for that reason, I'm pretty glad to have it. So that is the Final Audio B3. If you're interested in checking this thing out, of course, I got a link in the description down below, and while you're down there, If you found this video helpful, you liked it, whatever, please hit the like button. Helps me out, helps others find the channel. Subscribe to Super Review if you haven't already, and ding that YouTube bell so that you're around for the next time that I'm live, like I am live right now for the folks that are here in the chat. If you're not watching live and you're not interested in the Q&A, I'll see you in the next Super Review. If you are here live, let's have a conversation. All right. Let me catch up with live chat as best as possible. Thanks for sitting through that. Gunnar Jones, hola. John of Sparta, how's it going? Rob Hawk, how you doing? Alice's, howdy. Paul, nice to see you again. Paul saying, I do like the silver thing going on. And yeah, that is getting to... Am I wrong to value the aesthetic of this IM so highly? Again, like I have quibbles with the sound, but that shouldn't mean that I don't enjoy the sound of the B3. I do quite enjoy listening to this IM. It just puts me in a different mode than listening with either of these more technical, more traditionally neutral sound signatures. The B3 is just, it's its own thing, and I love it for what it is. Pythagoras, Hadio, you are a very famous mathematician. Cool Asian bro, how's it going? Gunnar Jones saying campfire audio angles meet Moondrop SSR SSP. That's actually a pretty interesting comparison. For folks who aren't familiar with what that reference is, check out Campfire Audio's website. Their IM's pretty aesthetic, and they put some pretty sharp angles on them as well. And then the Moondrop SSR is just a very thin, svelte sort of body. So yeah, I would say the final B3 does kind of resemble a weird love child of those. Where One Nation asking, am I ever going to review Meze products? So I have in the past reviewed Meze's headphones, the Meze 99 Classics. And in fact, I recall when I reviewed those, I didn't love them. I loved the build quality. That was a headphone where I loved the build quality and the aesthetic, but it wasn't enough to overcome how I felt about the sound. It was just a little bit on the thick and warm and muddy side, where the B3 I don't find ever really comes across muddy, maybe a little bit light on detail, but not muddy. That said, I did, maybe some months later, start experimenting with pad swaps on the 99 Classics, and I found some pads that I like quite a bit. Maybe I'll do a video about that in the near future. That said, you asked about Meze's. I'm guessing you're asking about their in-ear monitors. So they've got the Rai and the Rai Penta, and they might have some other IMs. I'm not actually totally sure. I don't have any plans at the moment to review Meze IMs, but certainly not opposed to it. Alice is saying, I needed a set of TWS, so today I purchased the Earfun Free Pro Olive Edition. I hope I made a good choice. I think... So I've also purchased a pair of the Earfun Free Pros, the Olive Edition, and I brought them up in my review of the Moondrop Sparks, which was about a month ago. So if you're interested in my thoughts on the Olive Edition, I talked about it there. I actually quite like the tuning on the Olive Edition. There's some issues I have with the functionality of the Earfun Free Pros. Like a lot of true wireless IMs, I feel like the touch controls are kind of a pain in the butt, a little too sensitive, and then they're just really complicated. So good luck with that, but you'll figure it out. But yeah, I actually quite like the sound on the Olive Edition. So he did a good job with the tuning. Ishan saying, hey, finally a good stream time for India. Yeah, so it's almost 2 p.m. here in California. It's earlier than I typically do my reviews. What time is it there? Rama asking, since you've tried listening to both the iBasso ITO1X and the File FH3, which one is your preference? I'm going to have a hard time answering that question for a couple of reasons. One, I did unbox the iBasso ITO1X and I did the frequency response measurement, but I haven't spent a lot of time listening to it because I've been trying to get through some of these other reviews that I've got backed up. The other reason is that I'm pretty sure the copy that I've got has a problem, and I need to probably get a replacement before I do the review and do much of an evaluation. Based on what I can tell from the sound signature, from what and again, this is probably not a fair comparison because it seems like there's a problem with one of the earpieces. The iBasso is probably more V-shaped, and I prefer the stronger mid-range tuning of the FiiO. But again, that's kind of an unfair comparison at this point. Paul asking, which earphones would I consider having the best bass audio? Interesting question. You could answer that in a number of questions, or a number of ways, right? I could say, like, what is my favorite bass? Which has like the perfect bass tuning, which maybe has the perfect bass texture, because those things may or may not be entirely connected. I could answer the question in a way like, which one has the best most bass for people that are looking for good bass, which is different, right? If I say that this earphone has my favorite bass, but I'm not a big bass guy, probably that won't be that applicable to someone who is really into bass. So I'm just going to answer it the most selfish and kind of trolly way possible. I'll say the Moondrop SSR. I really do quite like the bass on that one. It's at a good level. I mean, I wouldn't mind if it extended a little bit better into the sub bass, but it's at a good level for my preferences, and it's got like a good quality to it. It's actually pretty good. Jonathan asking, do I have any plans to review the Etymotic Evo? And yes, I very much want to review the Etymotic Evo. Whether or not that happens soon, I don't know, but someday I will get my hands on that one. What's up, Chick Tomas? Nice to see you back. And Winmin saying, I'm having the B3. I'm wondering if the Dusk or the S8 or the RSV would be an upgrade from the B3. And it really depends on what you like about B3 and what you want improved. I would say my personal preferences, just purely on sound, I would pick all three of those above the B3. But that might not be exactly what you want. So again, it really depends on what you're looking for. If you want, I would say that the RSV is probably the closest to the B3. It's still got a little bit of a warmth and a body to it, with I think better technical performance. But I think the Moondrop S8 takes that. It's like kind of like another step past that, where it's, I think, stronger technical performance than the RSV, but also kind of a leaner, more forward tune where, again, if we're kind of ranking them and stack ranking them, the B3 is like this warm, laid back tune. The RSV is right around here, and then the Moondrop S8 is a lot more forward, open, and less laid back. So hopefully that helps somewhat. But I think all three of those would be pretty good upgrades. But again, it really depends on what you're looking for. I think in terms of aesthetic, the only one that I would say is an upgrade would be the Moondrop S8, just for my preferences. But there you go. Rob Hawk saying the XM4 buds arrived yesterday. So that is one of the reviews. I'm reaching over here to grab them. That is one of the reviews that I mentioned. I haven't listened to the iBasso as much yet because I'm reviewing some other stuff. And this is, the XM4 is one of them. Darkness Deep. Hello from Brazil. Hola, obrigado. Congratulations on the channel. Your content is very good. Hey, thank you. Appreciate it. You ended up buying the Starfield and you're waiting for him to arrive. Cool. Well, I would be very interested to hear what you think about him. Scott Pledger, nice to see you again. Sorry I'm late. Had a meeting, which could have been an email. Isn't that true of a lot of meetings? Yeah. And then asking, any chance I'll be able to review the BMW P-i7s anytime soon? I don't think so. I don't have any plans to review anything from BMW. The only BMW stuff I can recall listening to was, I think, the PX over-ear active noise canceling headphone, and I did not like that one. I remember listening to, if you recall my review of the Sony XM3 headphones, this will put it into a context. I was reviewing the XM3s, also listening to the Bose QC25s and sorry, not the Bang & Olufsen's, the B&Ws at the same time. And of those three, I actually thought that the B&Ws were the worst sounding. And I don't like the Sony, so. Now, I don't know what that means for the PI7s. I'm not familiar with that set. Adrian asking, what do I think is the best $150 or less IM? Best is always a really tough question because it really depends on what you're looking for out of a sound. And even for myself, like it might depend on my mood, which one I want to listen to. My personal preference, if I could only have one IEM under 150 bucks, I'd probably pick the Etymotic ER2XR, honestly. But if you want more detail, go to the channel and the playlists tab. I've actually got a tab of playlists. Sorry, I've got a playlist tab. Wow, I'm struggling with that one. But I've got a playlist of reviews for my top 5 IEMs under certain price ranges, and I'm pretty sure I've got that one covered. J McC saying, went with the Moondrop Aria as your first IM, should arrive in the next few days. Right on. I think that's a great first choice. Sumo, no, I have not tried the Etymotic Evo yet. I'm very interested to check it out though. Big fan of the Etymotic ER4. You know, it's not maybe the most exciting earphone to listen to, but it's got really, really good treble quality, which is not a thing I can say about a lot of IEMs. So pretty interested to see what Etymotic does with the Evo. And Kaede, yes, I have seen that Shanling M3X with the Moondrop Intense Gym branding. I actually reached out to Shenzhen Audio asking. I assumed that they would be selling it, but it turns out they're not actually selling it. So I'm not sure how I would get my hands on that one. Karis asking about Polaris or the B3. I haven't heard the Polaris. I believe that's a Campfire Audio IM. I haven't heard that one, so I can't say. Oh, and Scott, you're saying that all the reviews that you've read on the B&W PI7 so far have basically claimed they're the best TWS in terms of sound quality, but none of the reviews are from reviewers that you most trust. Yeah, I mean, that's a danger with, I hate to, like, I'm not trying to throw shade at all. There's just like a different level of focus for reviews in the audio space, right? If you go to a general tech website or YouTube channel or something, and they review an earphone, they're going to come at it from a very different perspective than someone like me or Critical or Precog, right? Where we are just listening to IMs nonstop. We've got frame of reference with IMs that cost $1,000, $2,000. We've got frame of reference for IMs that are not very expensive that maybe don't sound that great. And so we kind of have just this very different frame of reference. Whereas I think on a lot of the consumer websites, they're probably going to be more interested in generally a bassy tuned IEM. And I think the XM4 is kind of a good example of this. If you look at the frequency response of this IEM, like straight out of the box, most people in the audio space are going to give it kind of a because it is quite dark in the treble. There is not a lot of treble here. And I guess I haven't actually watched or read any mainstream reviews of this, but I have seen that they're all very, very positive. And I'm curious to see if anyone calls that out, because I'm guessing they don't. Yeah. That said, that doesn't mean I don't like these, because they do have a built-in EQ, which you can use to save them. But yeah, out of the box, kind of a pretty surprising tune that I'm not surprised isn't a problem for more mainstream reviewers, and probably a similar thing to the PI7s is like, again, I haven't heard them. It's not really fair for me to say that I don't think they sound as good as more audiophile tune stuff, but it's my expectation. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong. Let's just say I'm wrong. Elhan saying the final B2, so this is the B3, saying the B2 are about $250 to $300. So about half the price of the B3. Is it worth the upgrade? I haven't heard the B2 actually. So final, they've got this series, the B1, the B2, the B3. And oddly, I think the B2 is the one that's like kind of the cheaper model. I've only heard the B3. And that's just because, well, one, it was the one that aesthetically pleased me the most. But the other thing is I have read reviews of all of these IMs, and it seems like the B3 is the one that most people tend to like. So I heard pretty mixed reviews about the B1 and the B2. So those would be hard for me to recommend. I mean, again, I haven't heard them, so I'm not recommending them, but those would be hard for me to blind buy, given what I have heard about them. Oh, Hi-Fi Go's got the M3X. Maybe I'll hit them up. Recode asking, will I review the Moondrop variations in the future? And the answer will be in a static. I hope so. Yeah, I think so. For those who are not familiar with it, maybe don't follow Moondrop on social media and stuff like that. Moondrop, the makers of some of my absolute favorite IMs, are coming out with a new model called Variations, which is an interesting name. I believe it is a tribrid IM, so it's going to have balanced armature, dynamic driver, as well as EST drivers in it. And the design of it looks very much like a Moondrop Blessing 2 with a twist, but I'm expecting that it's going to sound, I don't know, at least somewhat different, right? Otherwise, why would you make a different earphone? So yeah, I'm pretty interested to check out the Variations. But I'm not sure yet how soon that'll be. Darkness Deep asking, do I think it's worth it for you to buy the Moondrop K-XXX or the C-Audio Yume since you already have the Starfield? My opinion, no. I mean, I think I didn't love the Yume. The Yume's tuning was very, very nice, but I just found it really, really flat and boring sounding. So if you want to hear really good tuning, pick an Etymotic ER2XR. I think it does tuning at least as well and doesn't sound as flat and boring as the C-Audio Yume. And then the K-XXX is very, very similar to the Starfield. I don't think you're going to get much out of having both of those. Yeah, I would try and, either look for a different sound signature entirely, or look for something that does it differently, right? So the K-XXX and the Starfield, both single dynamic driver earphones. Maybe look for something that's balanced armature or hybrid, just to give you a different personality to the music, and I think that would be worth it. Rakuto Goku, you're claiming that the KZDQ6 with your mods has top of the line tuning? Interesting. Am I going to be able to reproduce that mod exactly, or am I just going to be stuck in this? Is it right? Is it not right? Kind of headspace. I guess we can measure it. We can exchange measurements. And interesting. Okay, maybe I'll check it out. That's a big claim. Rob Hawk saying the B&W PI7s have poor battery for 2021 buds, and then Scott saying, yeah, agree on that, but it's not a deal breaker for my use case, which actually brings up an interesting point with the true wireless buds. And these, like the XM4s, right, they claim, I think, 8 hours of battery life. I don't know that I'm actually going to get that because I'm using LDAC and I'm using with an EQ and noise canceling, so probably I'm not getting that much battery life. But also, when would I ever listen to these things for 8 hours straight? Maybe on a long flight or something like that, but that's not happening anytime soon. So for me, my original AirPods, their battery life is 2 to 3 hours, and it's very, very rare that I run them out of battery, just because the way I listen to them. I listen to them for a podcast, throw them back in the case, do something else, listen to them for 5 minutes, throw them back in the case, right? It's the way that I tend to use true wireless. Oh, and Scott, you're asking, what am I most looking forward to reviewing in the next few months? And honestly, one, I think I'm pretty bad about looking forward and paying attention to what's coming up in the future. I don't have a ton on my radar, if I'm perfectly honest. But knowing that Moondrop has a new IEM coming out, it's a tribrid. I don't know what the price range on it is going to be. I'm going to guess around like $500. Knowing that Moondrop's coming out with the variations, I'm pretty excited about that. Given the fact that the Blessing 2 is my favorite IEM at $300, and the Moondrop S8 might just be my favorite IEM of all, I'm pretty interested. And I really quite like the Dunu EST112, which was another tribrid. That one I do know is like $490, so it's in that $500 price range. I don't know the price range on the variations, but I would guess it's around that. Yeah. Martin Ferreira, how's it going? Nice. It's okay if you're late. I don't mind. Oh, and Scott, the Sennheiser IE900, I have not heard that yet. I pinged Sennheiser about it. I did not hear back from them, so I don't know. Might not be able to get a chance for that one. Adrian asking which IEMs do I think rival the Starfields in that price bracket. So the Starfields cost around $110, which is a pretty competitive spot. You know, let's see what they're up against would be things like the Tin Hi-Fi T4, the FIO FH3, it's about $130, a little bit more expensive, but I think pretty similar. And then I think you got to include the Etymotic ER2 XR in there. And of that bunch, my favorites, I would rank them Etymotic ER2, FIO FH3, and then the Starfield and the Tin T4 I'd probably put on a similar level, both being pretty solid. But yeah, I think the FH3, it just does that 3D image stronger than the Starfield and the T4, so that's why I like it. And then it's got that sub-bass party trick, which is pretty fun. But ultimately, it's the Etymotic ER2 XR that I would, you know, if I had to only have one of those, that would be the one I pick. Rico, you said, if you recall correctly, Dunu is releasing a flagship single dynamic driver sometime in the future that might be interesting. Yeah, I have seen them. I think they've shared it on social media, the Dunu Falcon. I don't know if it's going to be a flagship or if it's going to be, Dunu doesn't have anything in the budget range, but I don't think it's going to be priced as high as something like, definitely not as high as something like the Dunu Luna, and I don't think even as high as the Dunu Zen, but I guess we'll find out about that one. And then Rob Hawk saying harmonic dyne planar dynamic IM looks pretty interesting. It does look interesting, and I think I'm actually getting that one in for review, so that should be pretty. It's getting near the end of this review, I can tell. That one should be pretty interesting. But yeah, I guess on that note, my throat's sore. Too much talking this week. I'm going to sign out, but thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for the questions and the conversation. As always, if you want to carry on the conversation, I always recommend joining the Discord, which I have a link in the description to. While you're down there looking for that link, please hit the like button on this video if you found it helpful, if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel if you're not already, but you're here right now, so you're subscribed. And then I'll catch you on the next super video. Have a good week.